Today, we are excited to chat with Angie Lucas, an incredibly talented children's book author whose stories bring humor, heart, and imagination to young readers. Angie is the creative mind behind My Big Embarrassing Elephant, illustrated by Pierre Colette Derby, and Rafa and the Wrong Legs, illustrated by Anna Sanfilippo. Two beautifully written children's books that tackle with very important themes like shame, empathy, safety, and other big feelings that all kids, and let's face it, adults sometimes struggle with. So today we dive into Angie's creative process, her inspiration for these stories, and maybe even learn about some of her own big embarrassing elephants from her writing life. Let's welcome Angie Lucas.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So let's start with the elephant in the room, literally.
Okay.
In My Big Embarrassing Elephant, you captured the feeling of being awkward or out of place so perfectly. Was there ever a time in your own life when you felt like you were dragging around a giant embarrassing elephant?
Honestly, frequently. As a child, I felt my feelings so big. And anytime I would feel embarrassed about anything, whether it was something I really had a good reason to be embarrassed about or not, I would be just flooded with huge feelings of shame. I wanted to just sink through the floor. I wanted to disappear entirely. I felt embarrassment so strongly. And I did a little poll on my Instagram pretty recently, and I asked people, out of 4 options, what was the most uncomfortable feeling they felt as a child. And I included grief, fear, embarrassment, and I can't remember one more, but more people thought that embarrassment was a painful feeling than even fear, which surprised me. I mean, that's how I feel, but it was surprising to me to see so many people felt the same way. So embarrassment was just a heavy feeling that I really hated almost above any other feeling when I was a kid. I would avoid embarrassment at all costs. And a lot of times I'm writing books for my younger self, and I wanted to maybe normalize that feeling and let children understand that they're not the only one who feels that way. Because I think when you're a child, that's what you always think. No one's ever been as embarrassed as I feel right now. No one knows how this feels. And throughout my life, I've had big problems that have weighed me down. And one in particular was infertility. And I felt like talking about it would make it harder almost, or for a long time I wouldn't be open about it. I didn't want to talk about it. And I eventually learned, in fact, I was at a class and someone said, talking about infertility is not any harder than not talking about infertility. It's still there, whether you talk about it or you don't. And in fact, when I started talking about it with the right person, it felt a lot less heavy. So shame thrives in secrecy. Embarrassment feeds on secrecy and quiet. So the quieter we are about it, the heavier it feels. And in a friendly way, I wanted to convey that message to a child that when you have those feelings that you feel like you can't share, if you can find a trusted person to share them with, it gets lighter. It gets easier to bear.
I'm really curious, did you always know you wanted to write about social emotional learning books, or write about elephants and embarrassment or lost little boys, or did these stories just sneak up on you?
Say a little more the latter. The very first book I wrote was just fun wordplay. In fact, that's often where I start with the story, is some fun little bit of wordplay. My very first manuscript I was working on, which I worked on forever, was called The Very Private Pirate, because I just liked the play on those two words. And it wasn't a very good story, I eventually learned, and it broke a lot of rules of children's books. But I worked on that forever and ever. And it was just this fun, whimsical sort of story about a pirate who was hiding from his old pirate life and trying to blend into a neighborhood, but he had a giant pirate ship sticking out of his house, so he couldn't really hide, and he had a peg leg, and he had thigh patch, and he thought nobody could tell he was a pirate, and it was just for fun, and that's where I often start. But as I started thinking about and attending conferences and thinking about what is the heart of a story I want to tell, I would often go back to, what did I wish I knew when I was a child? And then I build a story around some lesson or concept that I feel like would have helped me cope with something when I was little. And so I kind of went there a roundabout way, but I still often start with wordplay, but then when I'm looking to add that second layer into the story, I often end up in a social emotional space, because you want to have depth to a children's story. You want it to work on a couple of levels in order to want to keep reading it again and again with your children, because that's what happens often with children's stories. You end up reading them again and again, and you want there to be new things to discover on additional readings.
So I recently talked to someone who said that social emotional learning books are dead. Do you agree?
No, I still see them being acquired. I see them at critique groups, and I see them still being published everywhere. I think maybe when they say they're dead, it might mean the really heavy-handed ones that are really, didactic and really trying to teach an obvious lesson. Maybe that's been played a little bit, but I think a genuine story that a kid can relate to that has a social emotional learning layer is classic and timeless and will always have a place.
So does Rafa's story come from any specific memories? Were you a sort of child who got lost a lot? And how do you see yourself in your characters? Do you see yourself in your characters?
Yes, and Rafa was written around a story that happened to me when I was probably 4 or 5, and I was at our local market, Peterson's market near our home, and I was with my mom, and I just have this very visceral memory that I can call up so clearly to this day. We were in the produce aisle, and I remember what it looked like in the 80s in that produce aisle. And I just reached around. I got distracted for a second. I reached to loop my arm around my mom's leg, which I used to do, like where you wrap it all the way around. And I did that. And then I looked up to talk to her, and there was a strange face looking down at me. And it was such a horrifying feeling in that moment. I just felt like my world had dropped out from under me. This wasn't my mom. I was expecting my mom, and you're so attached to your mother, your primary caregiver at that age. And it was so jarring to see this other face staring down at me. And when I am looking for things to write about, I try to think about universal childhood experiences and things that have happened to me that I feel like are pretty universal or relatable. And I've found, as I've talked about this, that a lot of people have experienced a similar thing as a child. In that first moment when you're expecting a parent or a familiar face and you see some other face, it really sticks with you. So I started writing about that experience, and I wanted to universalize it instead of just telling my own personal little experience. And I started thinking about how the story could be used to teach children what to do at that point. In my case, my mom was very nearby. I don't really remember. I didn't have to run through the store to find her. I think I had just turned the wrong direction. My mom was probably 2 feet this other way, laughing that I had grabbed onto some other lady. But I wanted to use it as an opportunity to teach children, what do you do if you lose sight of your mom entirely and you grab onto some other lady? And in this story, Rafa runs away, which isn't the best thing to do, but it's perhaps an understandable reaction in that moment for a small child. And so I wanted to use it to start a conversation or give parents an opportunity or teachers an opportunity to have a conversation about how do we stay safe when we're out in public if we lose sight of mom or dad. On the last page, there is a little conversation guide, a discussion guide to help walk you through some questions to ask children at the end of reading the book. And on top of that, there's a entire activity kit that you can find on the Marble Press website and also on my website.
So one of the wonderful things about Rafa and the Big Embarrassing Elephant is how they take just such an universal childhood experience and they make it very specific without losing any relatability. How did you approach the subject to achieve that?
I think it's a lesson I had to learn kind of the hard way. The very first book I wrote was called the first one I published was My Big Dumb Invisible Dragon. And in that story, I felt super passionately that I needed to keep the grief that happened in that story, it's a grief story, completely open so anyone could layer their experience in. So I didn't want to say who the person was who had died. And my editor pushed hard back on me with that. And I resisted internally, but wanted to be a good author who wasn't difficult. So I spent a lot of months, because it's a very long process publishing, and there's just little touch points with the author, but then you'll have months in between when you're just waiting for more art or waiting for printing or something like that to happen or waiting for a contract. And so I had a lot of time to just be stewing over this problem. And I finally just learned to trust my editor, which you have to learn how to do. And we made it specific. And it really did. Once I started seeing the art, I could understand why it needed to be specific, especially when a story is illustrated. It's going to be specific and set in a certain time or place anyway. And we think we have to keep it vague and open so anyone can see themselves in it. But I've learned that children are very good at putting themselves in any story they hear because that's just their developmental stage. Everything relates to themselves. You're just very self-centered as a small child, and you have to learn to broaden that perspective. So kids are very good at finding the commonalities of themselves in any character. And the more specific you are, the easier it is for them to imagine it and put themselves in it. If you keep it vague and just talk about principles or like with social emotional learning or concepts, they can't grasp that yet. They need as much specificity as you can offer.
You mean like the more abstract the story is, the more difficult for kids to relate to, right?
Absolutely. That's actually, you said it in one sentence. It took me a minute to...
No. I really like how you explained it.
So I did try the other way first, and I am grateful for the pushback for people who are more experienced than I am, and I learned through that it is important to be really specific and trust children to be able to pull the lessons out of it that you're trying to offer. And that's the kind of lesson that will stick with them stronger anyway, is if they find it themselves versus if you tell them really directly, here's what I'm trying to say in this story.
Your books are so full of warmth and humor. So do you find it challenging to strike a balance between teaching valuable lessons to kids and keeping the story light and fun?
It is kind of hard to get that balance. And the way I usually start is that my first draft has everything in it that I want to put in it, the whole kitchen sink. And then it's a process of paring back and realizing you have to leave space in the story. You have to leave space for the illustrator to tell part of the story. You have to leave space for the reader to bring themselves in. And with picture books, less is more. But when in your first drafts, it's good to put everything down that you're trying to say. Just let it all spill out. And then for me, it's then a process of saying like the minimum amount I can say to get the point across or get the reaction or hit the emotional note I'm trying to hit. So it is tricky and it takes multiple drafts. I think Rafa was only about 10 drafts. I think the elephant was probably closer to 17 or 18 drafts of writing a new version, taking it through a critique group or sending it to an agent or an editor, and then trying a new version, sometimes only slightly revised, sometimes a bigger revision. But yeah, it's absolutely a process.
So the art of Rafa and the big embarrassing elephant, so beautiful.
I agree.
They have a classic picture book feel. So what was it like seeing them come to life? Is anything different from how you pictured it?
It's so funny. I found each time that I have a certain vision in my head, and then once I see the art, it overwrites it like a computer program. I can't even remember what I used to think this elephant was going to look like, because now that I've seen the elephant, this is how it always should have looked. And I can't even think of what I used to imagine. It's definitely more kind of goofy, and there's this fun personality to the elephant that I kind of wasn't expecting. I think in my mind, I was picturing him being, I wouldn't say menacing, but maybe a little more
somewhat grumpy, like overbearing, right?
Yeah, like unpleasant. And he's actually just adorable the whole way through. And it really works because he's a little bit clueless. He's kind of like a dopey, clueless elephant, not a malevolent or mean one. And it works better, honestly. So it's not scary to kids. They can really relate, because even a big problem in their home, they're used to it. They've always had it. It's not as scary often or as uncomfortable to them as it is to someone else who might be looking inside. It's just because it's comfortable and what they're used to. So I think it really works it makes the metaphor work better for a young mind. So I credit Pierre for that brilliant way of representing that elephant. But yeah, it's It's always different than I imagined, but I'm always blown away because that's not my skill set. I wish I had that skill set like you have, Susan. When I watch, you've interpreted several of my characters in art, and it just blows me away how you're able to convey emotion and something that would take, is that they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and it's really true.
Thank you for acknowledging me. I really enjoy actually working with our illustrators too. And
pulling.
I love Pierre's work. I think he did an amazing job on
And the little girl,
elephant.
Maya, her expressions are so big, and you can just see so much emotion in her face, and just such simple lines, but somehow there's so much emotion in the art, and I don't know how they do it, but
Yeah,
I love it.
And I absolutely admire Anna's work too. What she did on the Rafa book.
Yeah, with Anna,
So colorful. You just want to eat up the pages.
I know. It's so bright. That's one of the things I love the most about Rafa and the Wrong Legs is how bright and vibrant and colorful. You just want to go right into that market and taste the cookies that are available.
And the fruit.
And the fruit, all the beautiful fruits. It's gorgeous. I love the art. And little Rafa is so cute. He's just perfect.
There are a lot of extra free materials that are available on Marble Press website. Partly, of course, we agreed on producing these together with you. You can find them on marblepress.com resources.
Free, isn't it? Free-resources.
Resources, yes.
Yeah.
And you will find these links. We will put it under the video in the description. But my question is to you is, who do you think will use those extra kits and how?
So they're a little different. The elephant kit is very geared to group discussions, and the whole kit is geared to like a classroom discussion. There's little lessons, complete lessons you can teach from the material, and there's craft activities and color, and there's a coloring page. There's several things in that kit really geared to teachers, but also a parent could download that and just pull out the pieces that work for them, only print 1 or 2 pages, or use the discussion guide to just talk to one child about it. That one is a little more geared to teachers. And with Rafa, I did 2 versions of the kit. I realized I have kind of 2 different audiences for the book. So there is one kit that is geared toward group discussion and activities. So a preschool teacher, an elementary school teacher, a librarian, a bookstore story time, anyone who's doing a group activity, a homeschooler who is in a co-op. And then I have a separate version of that kit that's just for parents, that it's this basically the same material, but geared just for a parent talking to one child or a couple of children about the material. Because it's a little bit, angled a little bit different, whether you're doing the activity with a group of kids or just one child or 2 children.
And you have wonderful craft activities in the elephant books kit too. I really like the little hat.
Yes, I love the hat.
And the balloon elephant.
That was so much fun to make. I made a balloon elephant in the exact shape. He's perfect for a balloon. And I should have grabbed him before we got on, but my daughter even made these tiny little clay versions of Maya and the elephant that are adorable. Those simple shapes are really fun to recreate. And I noticed which I hadn't noticed until recently, that the Marble Press free resources section has a draw your own elephant guide. It's a very simple shape to recreate. So that's another fun activity for maybe an art class or just for fun with your kids at home.
Being a children's book writer is not an easy journey. Is there any advice that budding authors should follow? Do you work alone? Are you a part of a writer's group? Or where do you get your inspiration?
So definitely a writer's group is essential. I have a critique group that formed at a writing retreat that I just Googled writing retreats, writing conferences in my area, and I attended one. I met the editor of my first book at my first writing retreat my first writing conference that I went to, which was just a 1-day thing. And then the next year I went to a 3-day retreat, and that's where I met my critique group. And we meet once a month over Zoom, and we share our work with each other. We critique each other's works. Our careers have all grown together. When we first started working together, I had my first book under contract, and one other person had a book out. 2 of the other people had books under contract. and there's 8 of us in the group. And since then, every single one of us has at least one book published, up to 3, up to 6 books published. So I would not be here without that group of women all working together and inspiring each other and showing each other what's possible. Sometimes just knowing it's possible can light that fire